Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the reserve seats phenomena that we've seen. Of course, for a while there's been a lot of discussion about the PTI as a political party, the symbol issue. Then following that, of course, they're joining the Sunni Ittihad Council, which followed the issue of reserved seats. And of course, recently we've seen that there has been a suspension as far as the additional reserve seats are concerned. And this represents, as far as legally speaking, a lot of legal issues, raises a lot of questions as far as government is concerned. It also raises issues as far as the numbers, as far as government is concerned at this time, as far as government and its allies, the main political parties are concerned. We'll be talking about all of that a little later on. We'll also be talking about IMF's negotiations, which are just around the corner, and what we can expect as far as the government is concerned, what the government hopes to achieve with regard to these negotiations. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Daniyal Sheikh, who's a political analyst. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Barrister Safi Ghauri, who's a legal expert. Thank you for joining us today. And Yasser, Latif, Hamdani, who's also a legal expert. Thank you for being with us today. Safiullah, I'm going to start off with you. As far as this issue of reserved seats is concerned, there has been a lot of debate on it, and I think we've spoken about it before, I think prior to the elections a little. It's been an issue for a while. How do you look at it legally speaking? One is the issue that, the symbol and the result of which, the fact that, one of the main political parties does not have reserved seats at this time, and that is now something that the court has upheld. But what follows and what we are seeing at this time, how do you look at it?
Right, thank you very much, Mahrukh. So, Mahrukh, I recall with our earlier discussions, this was always the case that we had discussed, and we always knew that this was going to be one of the most complicated legal problems that we have encountered in at least the recent history of Pakistan. The reason why I say this is because we don't have much of a precedence of how to treat a political party that suddenly goes independent and then joins another political party, in this case the SIC, but everybody then competes in the elections through independent seats. So we've had a lot of problems from the get-go, and then when the matter finally came to the Election Commission. Now, I believe that the ECP announced its judgment as per the legal scheme and provisions of Article 5, 106 and 224 of the Constitution, read with sections 104 of the Election Act, and that too read with rules 92, 93, 94 of the election rules. But the fact is that at the end of the day, the idea that the SIC cannot be granted reserve seats is one thing. But the idea that the reserve seats that have been won by, let's say, the independents, then be given over to PMLN, to People's Party, was something that does not make sense. There is absolutely no law in Pakistan that allows the ECP to give one party's mandate to another party. And that's what the problem was. So the Peshawar High Court, in this particular case, ruled that because the SIC had not secured those seats, therefore the seats had to be done away with, and they would be distributed pro rata amongst all the other political parties that are now in the field. However, because this was a legal invention of some sort, this was something that had never been done before in Pakistan, the matter was definitely going to go up to the Supreme Court, and now the Supreme Court has suspended it. So yes, this was expected. The problem really,
are there additional issues also, right, with this decision? I mean, it's not just about whether they can be awarded, but then, if they are left empty, how much of the house can then be left empty? And the practicality of that decision also is something that would necessarily be of interest to any court. Isn't that true?
It's the practicality of it, right? So at the end of the day, now what are we talking about? Now that the Punjab seats have been suspended, we'll have to suspend these reserve seats in all other provinces and the National Assembly too. That means that the ruling coalition cannot uphold a 2/3 majority that they desperately need to make constitutional amendments and make the changes that they so desperately have.
I want to come to that. Let me include the other guests in the discussion also, and then I'll come to that. Yasser, as far as the legal issues of this is one thing, there's also the practical issues of it and what it means for the main allied parties. But of course, as far as the law is the law and it has to be applied. But do you think that the way that this happened could perhaps have been done, this could have been taken up earlier, or, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, see, I think in terms of the timing of the issue, I mean, what we have to understand here is that this question of reserve seats is always going to be one that would be contested for obvious reasons. The fact of the matter is that there is this idea, there's this very popular sentiment that PTI or the SIC has now created, where it's playing into that victim narrative, right? The narrative is that they're the victims. So given that situation, I think in any event, and this is my view, I mean, this might go counter to or cross purposes to what others are saying, but I think that perhaps not having those seats would actually, or not giving those seats pro rata to the rest of the parties would actually allow, some sort of semblance of sanity to come back. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, because what's happening right now is that there is a real crisis of legitimacy for the legislature, as it were. So I don't know. I mean, I think that in terms of the whole thing itself is become such a farce, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Barrister Safi. I think that perhaps this would have been, and to add, I think that this should have been taken care of at the Peshawar High Court level. It shouldn't have gone all the way to the Supreme Court. It just goes without saying. So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Okay, let me include Daniyal in this. Daniyal, when we look at the politics at this time, of course it was going to go to Supreme Court, because to that extent I disagree with Yasser here, because this is something that is there are a lot of unprecedented issues involved as far as these seats are concerned, whether they will be awarded or not, whether they should be awarded or not, what are the number game and all. But in your opinion, as far as the number game is concerned, overall, how does that impact the loss of a 2/3 majority to the allies as far as amendment is concerned?
I don't think at this point it's going to be a big issue. As far as running the affairs of the government is concerned, they do have a comfortable majority. And before even coming to this decision, obviously I will not comment on that, but if you remember when the matter was in the election commission, the chairman of the Sunni Tariq was asked, did you nominate any female candidates, did you give any tickets? And he said, I have not even given a single ticket to a woman. In fact, no woman applied for a ticket from my party. So the policy on the reserve seat, as far as that was concerned, was that they have to give at least 5% representation in the general election, in the general tickets to women, which they did not. Now, coming back to the current situation, as far as the government is concerned, I feel the government is still in a very comfortable position.
But I think what they're saying is, as far as the legal experts with us today are saying that, saying that because of the loss of the symbol, the deprivation to any political party of their women's seats or minority seats, reserved seats, is one thing. But then saying that those reserved seats should be distributed in other political parties is another. So they're drawing the distinction there. They're saying that, whether, like you are saying, the Sunni Ittihad Council had not tendered a list, and the 5% of that and the technicality of that, if those requirements are not met, then of course they don't warrant
the seats,
they don't warrant legally seats. But do the other parties then warrant having? That's a question of law now for the court.
Absolutely. Now you're right, this is a question that has, you see, the whole purpose behind giving a political party women reserve seat was basically acknowledging their stance of giving women tickets in the general election, and if they fail to do that, do they deserve the seats or not? Now this is definitely a matter of that needs to be discussed both in the Parliament, and the Supreme Court also needs to review this.
Right? Supreme Court is going to give a decision on this. But Safiullah, as far as the practical aspect of a law, when the Supreme Court looks at this, are they going to be looking at the practicality of it also? I mean, as far as the principle of law is concerned, the application of it stricto sensu, other than that also, as far as whether it would be okay to leave a house in that proportion empty. That the two have to be weighed, or you think that no, those practicalities will not matter?
It's such a great question, Mahrukh, and I mean, I could only have given this question, an answer to this question, had the Pakistani courts been in the least bit predictable. But we have seen two extremes of both the same thing. On the one hand, they seem to be sometimes very sort of strict about the implementation of the word, and they want to just implement words to the T, as we have seen in the previous courts of Justice Daniyal, where it has come to a lot of which has caused a lot of problems to Pakistan. But the courts didn't care. They're like, okay, if the law says it, we don't care about what kind of a constitutional crisis it creates. We'll just go with what the law says. That has always been one way of attending to this. And then on the other hand, we have seen judicial activism, where judges have just created law out of thin air and implemented things that did not exist. So this is going to be a big test for Qazi Faiz Isa Saab. I do not know how he will behave.
Speaking, is it right? But generally speaking, the two are you do view. I mean, with regard to a particular law, the practicality of it is generally weighed in, is it not? I mean, with a question like this, where of course it's not just about law, but also about the politics and the house and the practicality of a parliamentary system and democracy also.
I'll actually disagree with Daniyal Sheikh when he stated that the government has a comfortable majority. It's not as simple as that. You see, it's this goes both ways. Now I'll explain why this is important and why what we're seeing right now is perhaps once again a turning point for Pakistan. So upcoming, if for instance the National Assembly loses its 2/3 majority, majorities are lost in other provinces, may or may not have the biggest impact, but it will have a massive impact on the kind of commitments that you will have with IMF, which you're doing the next section on. Now, our commitments with the IMF require us to make some legislative changes. We have already pledged that to the IMF. But if the government does not have those legislative structural changes that it can make, then it is a sitting duck government. A majority government means nothing if they are unable to take care of the country economically. And the country needs to stay afloat. Wide series of structural reforms that are now being carried out through the IMF program, through the SIFC, through a variety of other things that must be done in order to safeguard Pakistan. So if we were to understand that this government is now currently trying to follow an economic plan, then it must be given the mandate to follow that economic plan by the Supreme Court, weighing in on it as a practical measure. Now, if the Supreme Court believes that no, this is not something that we care about, well, we already have the example of what's happening in KPK, where the CM is openly threatening the governor, where you'll probably have other people coming in from the SIC who will, God knows where they will come in from. These new independent reservists will then continue to stop every effort that the government is making. So, I mean, really, at the end of the day, we have to decide between how much of...
Thoughts on this? Do you agree with what Safi
said? Well, I tend to agree, because here's the thing. The reason why I sort of said what I said earlier... Can you hear me?
Ji, clearly.
Hello?
We can hear you clearly.
Okay, so one of the things that I was saying earlier, and I just want to build on that, when I say it's become see, we have to admit, and I say this, not as a sympathizer of the SIC or the PTI, I have my own issues with them, but the fact of the matter is there's a huge question mark right now on the mandate. And given that having constitutional amendments passed through technicalities, such as the pro rata distribution of seats, reserved seats, if there was a constitutional amendment, I just fear what that would be for what that would mean for the posterity. So I think there is that question as well. I don't think, and like Safiullah was saying, when it comes to sort of our commitments, international obligations with the IMF, all of that comes under, there is a question mark on that. But, ultimately everything there has to be a certain semblance of propriety, which unfortunately would be missing if the pro rata distribution of seats were to happen.
Fair enough. Let me take this to Daniyal. Daniyal, on the one hand, legally there is, clearly whatever one's opinion on what happens. I mean, of course, my lords will decide whatever as far as legally and keeping the law afoot. But as far as politics is concerned, the house in question, of course, comfortable majority there is as far as the government is concerned. But like Yasser is saying, and also Barrister Safi is saying, there's clearly 2/3 majority is essential for any structural changes that are needed for economy. 2/3 majority is needed for constitutional amendments, and there will not be that 2/3 majority if these seats are then not given, for example, to any political party.
Well, let's see what the Supreme Court decides. For now, we just have the detailed judgment from the Peshawar High Court, which which was against the stance of the SIC. So let's see what the Supreme Court decides. And obviously, the Supreme Court is not going to consider the situation in the Parliament or whatever the constraints from IMF is. Obviously, while giving the decision, they're not going to consider this. And if, for instance, the decision goes against the current government, so I guess they'll have to then talk to the opposition and bring them on board. It wasn't like the PTI was against going to the IMF. It was actually them who went there. So whatever the structural reforms they want, in that case they'll have to. And in politics, nothing is impossible. So I guess this is going to be the way forward then.
But it is an interesting, of course, this is a very interesting and unique situation in many ways. And also, Safiullah, as far as, KP and the situation that we are looking at, as far as KP is concerned with the governor and CM KP and their fiery exchange that we've seen, the presence of political parties together, it then also, outlines again the importance of dialogue. And the fact that, you need dialogue for there to be agreement moving forward.
Oh, there definitely will be, sorry to cut you, there definitely will be dialogue. And as far as the statements that the Chief Minister is giving against the government, this is just to keep his leader happy.
You think it's just hyperbole?
Oh, course,
it has no relevance to actual practical politics.
We have seen in the past few weeks, and he has very well cooperated with the federal government, and he'll continue to. In fact, a week ago, the Interior Minister visited KPK on his invitation. So the working relationship is very good, and this he just does to keep make Imran Khan happy. Otherwise, as far as working with the federal government is concerned, it's going to be very smooth.
As far as, okay, that's one way of looking at it. Safiullah, as far as voting on legislation is concerned, do you think, as far as the role of the opposition there, there for that also, and I think we've talked about this for a while, there needs to be a working relationship. There needs to be, an opposition that is willing to play ball with the government on those core issues, regardless of what happens as far as the numbers are concerned, as far as the seats are concerned. Perhaps the issue itself highlights the importance of that dialogue itself. Again, no?
No, absolutely, Mahrukh. So in an ideal world, obviously we all want all parties to sit together and to talk. That is exactly what you, I, Yasser, Daniyal Sheikh who's here, everyone can agree on this, right? There's no doubt about it, and this should be the ideal outcome in any democracy. Nobody's against it. But historically, has that happened in Pakistan? I don't know. We've seen in the past that the oppositions have been extremely uncooperative, in particular when it has been PTI in opposition. We have seen walkouts, we have seen absolute ruckus. We've seen that bills have not passed. In fact, we've seen the lowest.
We've also seen the unfortunate cost of that as far as Pakistan is concerned. Yasser, do you agree with this?
But I just want to add one thing, Yasser. Just the fact that it gets so venomous in Pakistan that PTI is one of those extreme parties that have actually written to the IMF asking them not to work with Pakistan, saying that because the government is illegitimate or whatever. So this is what happens. People bring in their dirty laundry outside to third parties as well, which has come at a huge cost to Pakistan time and again. Sorry for cutting you. Yasser, please continue.
Yeah, I agree. I think the attitude of PTI or the SIC now has always been one of a destructive force. It's never been it's never been the kind of opposition that exists in normal democracies. Unfortunately, I fear we are not a normal democracy. But the fact of the matter is they're obviously, but then that goes back to this question. There has to be a concerted effort on the part of the government to re-establish its legitimacy as a government, because unfortunately that's what is under doubt,
But
and
Yasser,
that
we keep
is
on
what
talking
few.
about the legitimacy of a government. The question at this time, what is in front of us at this time, is that we have the numbers show at this time that there is an opposition. The numbers also show that there is a very real government, and it is there because it has the larger numbers. There is, and it should function as such. When you want there to be, I mean, in my view, and of course, it's open for you to disagree. It has to function within those numbers. It has to. The people have given a mandate which necessitates, this kind of a makeup of the assemblies at this time, and so therefore, the government has to work with them, whether they like it or not, and the opposition has to work with the government. But the question is, if that practicality, that working relationship can arise.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I see the in terms of I see your point in terms of how there has been this disruption, and this disruption will continue, unfortunately. And we've seen the statements, even in terms of interprovincial and the federal province situation right now with KP, which we were talking about. I think all of that indicates that the opposition, or the main opposition party, or the opposition party, in this case the SIC, is not interested in letting things proceed according to sort of the course of, as things would take their course. So unfortunately that is not happening, and that is something that the state has to contend with, obviously, given the situation, given sort of some of the extreme positions that all sides have taken. I'm not talking about the government. I think we know who we're talking about. We do see that there is no incentive right now for the opposition to come forward, and there's certainly no selflessness in terms of thinking about how this affects Pakistan and so on and so forth. So I completely agree with you, Mahrukh, on that.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Barrister Safi, Ghauri, Yasser, Latif, Hamdani. Thank you for joining us for this very important segment. We're going to move on. We'll be taking a short break, after which we'll come back and talk about the IMF, the talks that are going to be underway just round the corner, what we can expect, what the government hopes to achieve. All of that today, just after the break. Right, welcome back. We have with us Usman Chohan, who's an economist. Thank you for being with us. Usman, as far as the IMF program is concerned, what do you expect now? It's just round the corner. We've had talked about this from time to time, as far as, what the government expects, what they hope to achieve as far as these talks are concerned, and the impact overall on people, on economy, on inflation.
Absolutely right, and thank you for having me on your show again. The next phase should begin soon. The IMF team is out and about, having a look and exchanging data, and from our side, a lot of hard work is being done to be able to undertake a new program, and that has already been highlighted, articulated. And what's really important is that the IMF has come out with various messages that are positive. The IMF's appraisal is that hard work was done over the last year, and that has begun to show results. Another positive was that inflation is beginning to come down, and that's also easing stuff. For example, in terms of the way the balances look for the government, things are starting to look good. Another thing the IMF has said, which I think is important for negotiations, is that as long as the financing comes through and as long as we stick to the program and do our part and reforms continue onwards, things should look good. So I think the overall signaling is very good as we begin to talk about the next agreement. That's basically a summary I present to you.
Right. So the next government, as far as the downside is concerned, do you expect there to be more taxes, as far as, and the fallout of it, as the trickle down effect on people? What do you see, or, as foresee with regard to that?
Yes, that's a very important part of it, because in order to adhere to the stipulations of any new agreement, the government would have to continue to press down in terms of tough fiscal tightening in terms of tough measures on the tariff, on the basic energy items, and would have to consider other measures that may involve expanding the tax base. And since it isn't easy to do that for people outside the base, then more pressure may come on people who are already taxed. So that means it's tax depth as opposed to tax breadth. And so as far as the common man goes, they may continue to feel a pinch. And that pinch is ultimately a political difficulty for any government that has to deal with the IMF programs over the last 50 years in the developing world. It's a universal thing where the IMF will ask you to tighten your belt, and you will face a backlash from your people whenever you are putting those things into practice. So the trajectory will continue to be, to put it summarily, for the people, they may see a crunch. And the crunch will come particularly on things like the electricity bills or the gas bills or common utility things, as well as fuel prices for transport. So those are big chunks of the middle class's income, and they will continue to face that, unfortunately, as part of adhering to the program, whatever it looks like.
Okay, but as far as Pakistan's structural changes, we were talking about the phenomena of reserved seats, and of course that's under litigation at this time. Overall, does the IMF program envisage structural changes in in the next quarter?
That's a very good point. So one thing that the IMF has mentioned quite articulately is that political stability continues to be a downside risk, which means that political stability is necessary for the government to continue on the program. Normally, IMF messaging doesn't insist so much on such things. I myself don't see the need for that, but since the IMF has mentioned that, we should keep it in mind. And it speaks to what your previous discussion was within today's episode about how the legislature and all other state machinery works, because everyone needs to be on board for this program. You can't have any red herrings. You can't have too much disruption. Everybody needs to understand the importance of the tough measures that are needed. Otherwise, not everybody will be on board, and the IMF warns that that could mean an insufficient attainment of the requirements of the program. So yes, you are correct to mention that.
Usman, I will come back to you. Please stay with us. I'm going to go to Daniyal in the studio. Daniyal, if you heard what Usman is saying, there is importance of stability. There is importance of, and disruption can, make things difficult overall for Pakistan. I'm not saying for the government, but for Pakistan as far as economy is concerned. The kind of politics that we've seen from one particular political party recently with regard to the letter also that was written to the IMF, do you expect that kind of sanity to prevail?
Yes, now recently, if you look at the developments that have happened, especially them forming the government in KPK, and then the Chief Minister saying that he's willing to cooperate with the federal government, and now recently the way they were fighting each other to get the Public Accounts Committee and then taking it. So now there's a big difference in the way they plan to, like if you compare their politics, which they did in 2013 when they were doing that, their protests and all, at that time first they left the parliament, they resigned, and after that the National Assembly left, and then they started doing this. So right now they're very much part, like the Public Accounts Committee is a very important component of the National Assembly. So definitely they're willing to work with the federal government, and they will work, and I don't see, and especially because now they've realized, especially after 9th May, that this kind of politics,
for them to exist in the system is extremely important for their politics.
Absolutely, and the politics of anarchy has failed before, and like I would compare Imran Khan with a little kid, who tries to persuade his parents to get something, but when he realizes it's not working out, then he changes his way of functioning. So now it's not going to be like that, and him being in jail for the past so many, and so his party members suffering for so long, they've definitely learned this lesson. And in fact, the ones who did not cross the line when it comes to breaking the law, now they're all sitting in parliament and in the government in KPK. And so right now it's going to be very different from their politics in the past.
What about dialogue? Do you think that will be successful, this attempt at dialogue that we are looking at? A lot of talk is underway behind the scenes. You think it will happen?
See, the Public Accounts Committee cannot function unless there's a dialogue with the government. So them taking this responsibility is enough to tell you that now they want to come into the mainstream politics.
Okay.
And this is enough to tell us how they're going to function. Now, the little confusion that comes from the Chief Minister's statements, they're very They're political statements. They've got nothing to do with how he's going to function and how he has functioned in the past. He's been cooperating with the federal government. He recently visited Islamabad. He met the Prime Minister. The Interior Minister visited KPK. And so the working relationship between the federal government and the government in KPK is very smooth. So now, as far as his statement was concerned, now especially after looking at what happened during the tug of war for the Public Accounts Committee, he definitely feels that it's important to keep Imran Khan happy, and so that's why he gives such statements once in a while, but they're definitely not going to.
Okay, fair enough. Let me go back to Usman. Usman, there is, we talk about dollar is extremely important in the sense that, how it, as far as the market overall is concerned. Do you think that we are going to see perhaps a further increase or maybe stability? We've seen a largely stable dollar for a little while now. You think that will continue? You think there will be perhaps more, it'll go down further, rupee can strengthen, or you think that's too optimistic?
This is an excellent question, and any economist would hesitate to present a forecast on the foreign exchange markets because they are volatile and they're complex and they are driven by multiple factors. So it's not just rupee-related factors, it's also dollar-related factors when you look at a rupee-dollar exchange. So it is a tricky question. We should start with that. Now, you are correct to know that we've had 7-8 months of a very stable rupee, and this has been very good for Pakistan. It's a big relief because things had begun to go really over the top in terms of devaluation. It was very scary, and thankfully that has not continued to put in its place. Now, going forward, suggestions from what I have been reading from the IMF side, from the Pakistan side, are that there is that idea of a natural devaluation of the rupee in a gradual manner that happens. So that means about 7% per year, but that is manageable, and that actually reflects the inflation rate more than anything, right? So we have high inflation relative to the world, so the currency then ultimately reflects that. But any sudden devaluation, I don't anticipate. And one reason why I mentioned that as caution is that both statements from both sides, Pakistan and the IMF, have mentioned more adherence to a market-determined rate. The problem with markets in this sense is that they are so many signals, people don't know what to think, and there's a lot of speculative activity. Because that speculative activity was effectively curbed around September last year, we had a stable rate. So it is good to go towards market determination, but because these markets are essentially messed up by speculation, you cannot go entirely or in one go onto it. So to put all of this into summary, I would say to you that I expect the rupee to remain broadly stable, but you should expect graduated declines as would reflect in inflation. So overall, things should be okay. No huge jumps or drops.
What about inflation? Inflation, particularly, when we talk, of course, the government is going to do its best to shelter those below the poverty line and a little further up, and perhaps burden those that can take the burden. But do you see that inflation, the impact of inflation minimizing, or you think it will increase? Because overall, like you said, the global trend is not very optimistic in that regard.
Yes, you're correct. That there are risks to global inflation because of geopolitical reasons. There's a genocide happening in the Middle East. There is ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe. It is a scary time. So that can always be there. But overall, the trend has been easing in Pakistan. If you look at the year-on-year comparisons, now things are starting to come down. And what this now means is there is a lot of pressure on our central bank to start to cut down the extortionary exchange rate, the interest rate of 22%. This interest rate is too high to do business. And so now perhaps they will have a meeting earlier than expected, or as is expected on June 10th, they will sit down and they should look very seriously at lowering it. Because now if you have inflation around 20%, but your interest rate is 22%, now you're going backwards. That we can't have. So the interest rate has to start to come down. And I think that's a good thing. So to put it into the relationship, as inflation is starting to look better in Pakistan specifically, even though the risk exists overseas and overall, since it is going down, interest rates should also match that. And so there's a lot of pressure on the SBB to take a good hard look at where the interest rate is now.
Okay, let me come back to you. Daniyal, as far as the government is concerned, they're talking about, we have a finance minister at this time who said that they want to, of course, restrict the burden to the lowest those that can't afford and those that can't. Do you think that overall, as far as this, we're also going towards the budget, it's going to reflect those trends also following the IMF?
Definitely, this government or any political government will try its best to not burden the downtrodden people, or especially the people living under the poverty line. But as you know, this government and the PDM government before, they inherited a lot of debt and from the government before. So to come out of that, and then like Mr. Usman Chohan was saying, the geo-economic situation and especially the crisis in the Middle East. So it's definitely a very difficult situation for Pakistan, and it's not going to be easy for the government to take such extreme measures, but definitely they'll have to do whatever it's necessary to keep the economy going.
But the political capital also, the government, of course, I mean, that's something that is of importance to any elected government.
Well, that is true, but you see, this is why democracy gives a 4 or 5 year term, because obviously in the start governments do have to take tough decisions. Like even in America, the American presidents, whenever they're giving their speeches during the elections, they talk about an 8-year program, because it's assumed that they're going to have 2 terms in office. So definitely, judging them after a year or two, it's difficult. Whatever policies they're going to make right now, it's going to take at least a few years for them to...
It's going to take some time. But Usman Sahab, there is, we talk about stabilization, of course, and we want there to be stability. With respect to that, we have a new team in place. Of course, the Special Facilitation Council also. We've talked, there's a lot of talk of investment. Do you think it's actually, there's going to be a tangible, translation of that very soon? Do you see that happening?
That's a very good question. So there's been a lot of rhetoric that has been favorable towards the SIFC, but in terms of translating it into deals, I don't see so much on the table. But that has to be evaluated over a longer horizon. So, for example, the Saudi team had come earlier, and there was very positive vibes on both sides, and that is going to be succeeded by further visits, us going there, them coming here, and so there's a private sector element to that. So there is a lot of room for deals to be made. But fundamentally then, if we have this SIFC, what the IMF has said about that is that there has to be more safeguards around it, which is to say that if you have this and you are going to use this, then you have to look at what all your other ministries do. Why do you have such a big government and then you have such a big fiscal expenditure on the state when you will have a one-window operation now? So the redundancy is what the IMF says should be looked at carefully. I do expect the Saudis to pull in for very, very good returns. Like a lot of things that are being presented in these, put on the table between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are very favorable for Saudi. Like I don't understand why they wouldn't do that. So I expect there to be positive moves there. I also expect the UAE to take advantage of this, and China should also look for better synergies between CPEC-related stuff and SIFC if this is a model. So overall, the IMF has raised its concerns about this, that you really need to think about what this does when everything else is still there. But I do believe that Saudi Arabia will pull in via the SIFC into investments.
Fair enough. Overall, as far as the next couple of months are concerned, we are also, I know there's little time, but my last question to you, as far as the budget is concerned, as an economist, what kind of a makeup do you see largely with regard to, of course, now it's very close. And of course, the government has been working on it for a while. And so what kind of a budget do you envisage this time round?
It's a tough question because there's 2 paths for Pakistan now. One path is to stick to what the IMF has already put out in terms of guidelines for energy, for gas, for all of these different things. And therefore, if we follow that, our budget will very much reflect those measures. So you would have financial consolidation, you would have low growth, but you would also curtail your current account deficit and other things. So you would be kind of picking the pieces and putting them together. That's one path for the budget. The other path for the budget is that because of the political capital that you've mentioned appropriately, then there may be some largesse on the part of the government. And therefore, that will put us in an uncomfortable position with the IMF, given the timing of the negotiations vis-a-vis the budget, which is June. So I believe that the first path is the more sensible one in the sense that it's long-term oriented, although sacrifice is involved. And I don't believe that political capital can even be gained at this point. We have to really prioritize the economy And I don't care which political party does it, because we are all one big family and we all have to hunker down. So political capital is not of interest to me, but the IMF negotiations are.
Daniyal, your quick comments. Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
I just want to start from where Mr. Usman just left, that we're one big family. And I do feel now elements within PTI are also realizing this, that bringing down the system is not going to help anyone, because ultimately they have to survive within the system. So definitely the way things are going to, I'm predicting that there's going to be harmony in the country as far as the political front is concerned. And soon we will start moving. We already are moving in the right direction, and we'll see a lot of progress in the coming days.
On that note, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for joining us, Barrister Safi, Ghauri, Yasser, Latif, Hamdani, Daniyal Sheikh, Dr. Usman Chohan. Thank you so much for your very valuable time. Of course, as far as Pakistan is concerned, there are no two opinions on the fact that Pakistan will make the sacrifices that it must make for a stable economy to move forward. And as far as the government is concerned, that is going to be their main priority as far as the budget is concerned, as far as talks with IMF is concerned, and as far as prioritizing what the IMF lays down, which is also something that is essential for Pakistan to move forward economically. Let's hope that we can do that. Let's hope that we can all coexist and work together, whether it's the government, the opposition, to work for the system, work within the system, so that there can be tangible results for the economy. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.